Officer,
You match a description we're looking for.
what description?
Black female, late 30s, silver sedan. Where are you from?
I'm from Detroit. I'm an American citizen.
You got any papers on you? Proof of citizenship?
Officer, I've already provided you my driver's license.
You're avoiding the question. You're come with us to jail.
Officer Stephen Cooper had been with the Philadelphia Police Department for 6 years when he made the decision that would end his career and cost the city $4.3 million. It was October 27, 2024, an ordinary Sunday afternoon on Market Street. He was 34 years old, confident in his authority, and completely oblivious to the fact that the woman he was interrogating had 12 years as an FBI special agent. The credentials hung visibly around her neck throughout the entire encounter. He never looked at them, not when he demanded her papers, not when he ordered her out of the vehicle, not even when he placed her in handcuffs on a public sidewalk while her federal badge caught the afternoon sunlight. Cooper was so certain of his judgment, so convinced that this black woman needed to prove she belonged in America, that he never considered he might be arresting someone who had sworn the same oath he had, someone who had simply sworn it at a higher level. He didn't realize he wasn't confronting a victim. He was waking up to a consequence. Sarah Warren had dedicated 12 years of her life to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. At 38, she was a special agent with expertise in counterterrorism operations and constitutional policing standards. Born in Detroit, Michigan, she held top-secret security clearance and had trained hundreds of local law enforcement officers on civil rights compliance. Her personnel file documented commendations, successful investigations, and testimony before congressional committees. On October 27, 2024, she was driving through downtown Philadelphia, returning from a routine meeting at her field office. Her government-issued credentials hung visibly from a lanyard around her neck, standard protocol for federal agents. She maintained careful attention to traffic laws, driving 5 miles under the speed limit on Market Street. Her registration was current, her insurance valid, every light on her vehicle functional. She had committed no violation. The red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror without warning. Warren's training took over immediately. She signaled, checked her mirrors, and pulled to the curb with practiced precision. Her mind ran through a mental checklist, searching for any reason she might have been stopped. Nothing. She watched in her side mirror as 2 officers emerged from the patrol vehicle. Officer Stephen Cooper approached the driver's side window, his partner Ivan Evers positioning himself at the passenger side. Standard tactical positioning. Both wore body cameras. Everything that followed would be recorded. "License and registration," Cooper said. Warren retrieved both documents calmly, handing them through the window. "May I ask why I was stopped, officer?" Cooper studied her driver's license with deliberate slowness. Several seconds passed. Finally, he looked up. "You match the description of someone we're looking for." "What description?" Another pause. "Black female. Late 30s. Silver sedan." Warren's eyes flicked to her rearview mirror. 3 other silver sedans were visible on Market Street within a single block. The description was so broad as to be meaningless, and they both knew it. "That's a pretty broad description, officer." "What was this person allegedly involved in?" His jaw tightened. "That's not your concern right now." The defensive edge in his voice told Warren everything. There was no suspect. There was no description. There was only a black woman driving through downtown Philadelphia, and 2 officers who had decided that was reason enough. The confrontation had begun. Cooper held Warren's license but made no move to return to his vehicle to run it through the system, standard procedure for any legitimate traffic stop. Instead, the questions continued. "Where are you coming from?" "From work. Downtown Philadelphia." Warren kept her voice professional and even. "Where are you from originally?" The question landed like a slap. Warren had heard it countless times in her life, always with the same underlying assumption. She also knew exactly where this was heading. She had investigated departments for this precise pattern of behavior. Detroit? Michigan? I'm an American citizen. Cooper leaned closer to the window. You got any papers on you? Proof of citizenship? There it was. The question that transformed a questionable traffic stop into something else entirely. Warren felt her heart rate elevate, not from fear, but from the weight of recognition. This was textbook racial profiling, the kind she had spent years documenting in federal civil rights investigations. She responded carefully, choosing each word with precision. Officer, I've provided you with my valid Pennsylvania driver's license, which is government-issued identification. What additional documentation are you requesting? And under what legal authority? It was the question of someone who understood constitutional law. Cooper heard it as defiance. I'm asking the questions here. You need to answer when an officer asks you something. I did answer your question, officer. I'm simply asking for clarification on what specific documents you need. Evers, who had been silent until now, moved from the passenger side to join his partner at the driver's window. Two officers now stood over her vehicle, a tactical positioning designed to intimidate. Warren's FBI credentials hung in plain view at chest level, the bold blue letters FBI clearly visible in the afternoon light. Neither officer looked at them. They were seeing only what they had already decided to see, a black woman who needed to prove she belonged. The psychological dynamic was clear. In their minds, they held all the power. They had badges, weapons, and the authority of the state behind them. Warren was simply someone who needed to comply. They had no idea they were making the worst mistake of their careers. "Step out of the vehicle," Cooper commanded. Warren's hands remained on the steering wheel. "May I ask why I'm being asked to exit my vehicle, officer?" "Because I'm telling you to." Cooper's voice had risen slightly. "You want to make this difficult?" The word difficult carried a loaded meaning in police interactions. Warren had reviewed hundreds of use-of-force cases where officers justified violence by claiming the subject was being difficult. She knew that in many departments, it was code language, justification for escalation. She also knew she had rights. The Supreme Court had established clear standards. Officers needed reasonable suspicion of criminal activity to extend a traffic stop beyond its original purpose. Demanding exit from a vehicle required articulable safety concerns or evidence of wrongdoing. But Warren also understood the reality of the situation. Two armed officers, increasingly agitated, had already demonstrated they were operating outside legal boundaries. Refusing could provide them the excuse they seemed to be seeking. She stepped out of the car. Standing on the sidewalk now, Warren faced both officers directly. She was 5'6", professionally dressed, her posture calm despite the escalating situation. Her FBI credentials hung at chest level, even more visible now than they had been through the car window. The laminated badge caught the sunlight. Her photo was clearly visible. Her name was printed in bold letters beneath the FBI seal. Evers looked directly at her chest, and somehow still didn't see the credentials. Or perhaps he saw them, and his brain simply couldn't process the cognitive dissonance. The woman they had decided was a potentially undocumented immigrant couldn't simultaneously be a federal law enforcement officer. "You're being very evasive," Evers said. "That makes us suspicious." "I've answered every question you've asked me, officer." "Not to our satisfaction." Cooper crossed his arms. "You got a green card? Work visa? Something that shows you're supposed to be here?" The question was stunning in its directness. No pretense now, no procedural justification. Just the raw assumption that a black woman in America must prove her right to exist on an American street. Warren took a slow breath. "I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in this country. I don't need to provide proof of citizenship for a traffic stop." Cooper's face flushed. "That's not for you to decide. Put your hands behind your back." The command cut through the October afternoon like a blade. Warren's eyes widened, not with fear, but with something closer to disbelief mixed with professional outrage. "You're arresting me?" "Obstructing an investigation. Failure to provide identification." Cooper's hand moved to his handcuffs. Warren's mind raced through the legal absurdity of the claim. "Officer, I provided my driver's license. You're holding my identification in your hand right now. Turn around, now." This was the moment that would define everything that followed. The point where a questionable stop became an unlawful arrest. The instant when poor judgment crossed into actionable civil rights violation. The body cameras captured every second. Warren slowly turned, her movements deliberate and calm. She had counseled countless victims of police misconduct, had reviewed thousands of hours of similar footage, had testified in federal court about the precise moment when law enforcement crosses constitutional lines. Now, she was living it. Evers moved behind her, pulling her arms back with more force than necessary. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the street. Cold steel closed around her wrists. Warren felt the bite of metal against skin, felt her arms pulled into an uncomfortable position behind her back. Her FBI credentials swung freely from the lanyard around her neck, catching the afternoon sunlight. The irony was almost incomprehensible. A federal agent with visible credentials identifying her as a law enforcement officer, being handcuffed on a public street for the crime of asking questions while black. A small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk. Several people held up phones, recording. More witnesses, more evidence. Neither officer seemed to notice or care. They had committed fully to their course of action, driven by ego and anger, and the desperate need to reassert authority over someone who had dared to question them. In that moment, Cooper and Evers had transformed a career-ending mistake into a federal case. They had created evidence that no police union could explain away, no department spokesperson could justify, no legal defense could overcome. They had arrested an FBI agent for being black in public. Warren stood handcuffed on the sidewalk, her mind working through rapid calculations. She could have ended this confrontation 8 minutes ago. The moment they first approached her window, she could have identified herself, shown her badge, and invoked federal authority. The stop would have ended immediately with profuse apologies. But something had stopped her. Some part of her needed to document exactly how far they would go, how far the system would allow them to go, how a routine interaction could escalate into constitutional violation when officers operated on assumptions rather than evidence. Now she had everything she needed. The entire encounter, captured on body camera. Every unlawful question, every rights violation, every moment of escalation. The arrest itself, the culmination of unchecked bias transformed into state action. It was time. "Gentlemen," Warren said, her voice carrying the weight of authority that comes from 12 years as a federal agent, "before you continue any further, I'm going to identify myself. I am Special Agent Sarah Warren, with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My credentials are hanging around my neck. My badge number is visible. I suggest you look at them very carefully before we proceed any further." The body camera footage would later be analyzed frame by frame, and this moment, this precise instant, would be replayed millions of times online. The moment when everything changed. Cooper's hand, which had been reaching for her arm, froze in midair. His face transformed from anger to confusion, to dawning horror in the space of 3 seconds. Evers leaned forward, squinting at the credentials that had been hanging at chest level throughout the entire encounter. His eyes focused on the bold blue letters, FBI, then on her photo, then on her name, printed clearly beneath the federal seal. The color drained from both officers' faces simultaneously. It was as though someone had pulled a plug, letting all certainty and authority flow out of them in a rush. We didn't, Cooper stammered, unable to complete a sentence. Warren's voice cut through his attempt at explanation, no longer requesting but commanding. Uncuff me! Now! Evers fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so violently he could barely fit the key into the handcuff lock. Once. Twice. Finally, the mechanism clicked open. The handcuffs fell away. Warren rubbed her wrists, where the metal had bitten into skin. She looked directly at Cooper, then at Evers. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted completely. Warren did not wait for apologies or explanations. While still standing on the sidewalk, wrists red from the handcuffs, she began speaking directly to the body cameras mounted on both officers' chests. Her voice was calm, measured, and devastatingly precise. The voice of someone who had written hundreds of federal incident reports and knew exactly what needed to be documented for legal proceedings. For the record, I am Special Agent Sarah Warren, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Badge number 847-2156. The date is October 27, 2024. The time is approximately 2:47 p.m. The location is Market Street near 15th Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I am documenting the following civil rights violations committed by officers. She paused, leaning forward to read their nameplates. Stephen Cooper and Ivan Evers of the Philadelphia Police Department. Neither officer moved. They stood frozen, watching their careers disintegrate in real time. Warren continued, her recitation methodical. Officers Cooper and Evers initiated a traffic stop of my vehicle without reasonable suspicion or probable cause of any traffic violation. When I inquired about the reason for the stop, Officer Cooper claimed I matched a vague description that could apply to thousands of individuals. The officers then demanded proof of citizenship without any reasonable suspicion of immigration violation, which constitutes illegal racial profiling. Her tone never wavered. Despite my compliance with all lawful orders and my provision of valid state identification, the officers escalated the encounter and placed me under arrest without probable cause. They handcuffed me while my federal law enforcement credentials were clearly visible around my neck. At no point during this 8-minute encounter did either officer examine my credentials, despite their prominence. Evers opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. There was nothing to say. Every word Warren spoke was documented on their own cameras. I train law enforcement officers on constitutional policing, Warren continued. I teach them how to avoid exactly what you just did. And now, I'm going to be the plaintiff in the federal lawsuit that explains to your department and to every department in this country why you don't do it. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling your supervisor now. And I'm going to need a chain of custody form for these body camera files, because they are now evidence in a federal civil rights case. Within 10 minutes, a police sergeant arrived at the scene, his expression grim as he took in the situation. Two of his officers standing beside an FBI agent who had just been unlawfully arrested. Within 20 minutes, a lieutenant appeared. Within an hour, a captain was on scene, offering profuse apologies that Warren accepted with professional courtesy, but no forgiveness. The body camera footage was uploaded to FBI servers that same afternoon. By evening, Warren had contacted the Bureau's Civil Rights Division. By the following morning, she had retained Benjamin Denvers, one of the nation's most prominent civil rights attorneys, known for representing the families of dozens of victims of police misconduct. The Philadelphia Police Department immediately launched an internal investigation and issued a carefully worded statement calling the incident concerning and promising accountability. They implemented a media blackout on the footage, hoping to control the narrative. They failed. Within 1 week, someone inside the department, perhaps an officer disgusted by what they'd seen, perhaps someone in the chain of evidence, leaked the body camera footage. The video didn't just go viral, it went thermonuclear. Within 72 hours, the footage had accumulated over 50 million views across social media platforms. The hashtag #ShowMeYourPapers trended for 3 consecutive days. News networks played the footage on loop, with legal analysts calling it one of the most clear-cut cases of racial profiling ever captured on camera. Civil rights organizations held press conferences. The NAACP demanded immediate termination of both officers. The American Civil Liberties Union issued a statement calling for systemic reform of the Philadelphia Police Department. Religious leaders organized protests. Community activists organized rallies. The image of a handcuffed FBI agent with her credentials visible became the defining visual representation of racial profiling in America. It was impossible to dismiss, impossible to justify, impossible to explain away. Here was a federal law enforcement officer, someone who had dedicated her career to public service, treated as a criminal because of her race. The Philadelphia Police Department, facing unprecedented public pressure and the prospect of a federal civil rights lawsuit backed by ironclad evidence, knew they had no good options. They could fight and lose catastrophically, or they could settle and implement reforms. The decision would take months, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Philadelphia Police Department's internal affairs investigation concluded in 6 weeks, remarkably fast for a process that typically dragged on for months. The findings were damning and unequivocal. Officers Cooper and Evers had engaged in racial profiling, violated the Fourth Amendment through an unlawful stop and arrest, ignored clearly visible federal credentials, and acted on bias rather than reasonable suspicion or probable cause. Both officers were suspended without pay pending final disposition. But Warren had no interest in internal police discipline. She wanted federal accountability. In January 2025, she filed a lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania under 42 U.S.C. Barf 1983, the Federal Civil Rights Statute. The complaint alleged violations of her Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizure, her 14th Amendment right to equal protection, and state-level claims of racial discrimination and false arrest. The case had everything plaintiffs' attorneys dream of: a sympathetic victim with impeccable credentials, defendants with documented histories of complaints, crystal-clear video evidence capturing every moment of misconduct, and facts so egregious that no jury would side with the defense. Legal experts who reviewed the case called it textbook unconstitutional policing. The footage became required viewing in law school civil rights seminars. Constitutional scholars wrote law review articles analyzing every aspect of the encounter. The Philadelphia Police Department's attorneys reviewed the evidence and delivered the assessment city officials already knew. At trial, they would face catastrophic liability. A jury would award massive damages. The publicity would be devastating. The precedent would be dangerous. Settlement negotiations began in March 2025. Warren's demands were clear: substantial financial compensation and, more importantly, systemic reforms that would prevent this from happening to anyone else. The city resisted at first, then reviewed the polling data. The public was overwhelmingly on Warren's side. Every demographic, including the department's traditional defenders, believed the officers had engaged in racial profiling. Going to trial would only amplify the damage. By May 2025, both sides knew the case would settle. The only question was the price. On June 18, 2025, the settlement was announced at a press conference covered by national media. The city of Philadelphia agreed to pay Sarah Warren $4.3 million, among the largest civil rights settlements in the city's history. But the financial award was secondary to the consent decree attached to the settlement. The reforms were comprehensive and enforceable. Mandatory implicit bias training for all officers, revised traffic stop procedures requiring documented reasonable suspicion, civilian oversight board with real power to investigate racial profiling complaints, quarterly audits of body camera footage, specifically examining interactions with minorities, and an independent federal monitor reporting directly to the district court for 5 years. Officers Stephen Cooper and Ivan Evers were terminated for cause. Their personnel files, now public record through discovery, revealed a pattern both disturbing and predictable. Multiple complaints of targeting minority drivers, accusations of excessive force that had been quietly settled, performance reviews that noted aggressive approaches to policing that supervisors had praised rather than corrected. Neither would work in law enforcement again. Their names became synonymous with racial profiling. Sarah Warren was promoted to supervisory special agent and appointed to lead a new FBI task force working with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division to investigate police misconduct nationwide. She became a national figure, appearing on 60 Minutes, testifying before Congress, and speaking at police academies across America. In her 60 Minutes interview, she reflected with characteristic directness, "I knew what was happening during that stop because I've studied these patterns for years. But knowing doesn't prepare you for the feeling of having your citizenship questioned on a street in your own country, or being handcuffed for asking questions. If this can happen to an FBI agent in broad daylight with cameras rolling, imagine what happens every day to people who don't have federal credentials or legal expertise." That's what this case is really about. The body camera footage from October 27, 2024, became mandatory training material in police academies nationwide, a cautionary tale of how quickly bias can escalate into constitutional violation, and how the assumption that someone looks illegal can destroy careers, cost millions, and expose the fractured foundations of American policing. The settlement sent a message that reverberated through law enforcement agencies across the country. Some mistakes are too costly to ignore, some violations too clear to defend, and some people too determined to let injustice stand unchallenged. Justice, when it finally came, was comprehensive.